I usually begin my message with some kind of story. And today, as I was considering that, I had a couple in mind. But as I spent a little time in quiet this morning, I thought that my story was maybe the one that should be told. I've always been attracted to growing things, but I have a bit of a checkered past with regard to growing things in the garden. Sometimes, as we've talked about earlier in the month, I didn't do much to prepare the soil. I just kind of stuck the seed in the soil. And the soil was not too productive, and thus the garden didn't produce like I really had hoped that it would. Sometimes it was any old seed, one that had been left high and dry and hot, and some that had been left low and cold and moist. They didn't produce very much. So the seed I sometimes failed to take account for. Just looked at the pretty picture on the package and said, oh, that's what we're planting. Doesn't always work that way. I tried growing from seed inside, sprouting and growing the seed that could be transferred to the garden, or growing the plant that could be transferred to the garden. But that didn't always work well because I sometimes didn't keep it in a warm enough spot, didn't allow it to have much light, and occasionally forgot to water it. So those seedlings were anemic at best. This was my checkered past, okay? I had some successes, but I'm just confessing here. Sometimes the plant or the tree, I planted a few trees in my time as well, grew up lavishly. They looked great. And I can't say it as well as you do, Donna, or you did. But my, aren't you all grown up? I said, because I learned that if you talk to plants, they do better. So I told them, my, aren't you all grown up? Often my planting looked good, but didn't bear any fruit. Sometimes the once robust and healthy plant withered because it didn't have water or because it hadn't put its roots down so that it could withstand a little wind and a little water, and nothing came of it. Sometimes the weeds competed extraordinarily well with the plant, and I didn't pay any attention to the weeds. It would have been good if I'd have plucked them out at the very first sign of them. Might have had more fruit from this all grown-up plant. And sometimes I love the phrase in the reading that Donna did for Metaphysical Moment, reaching arms to the sky. Sometimes the plant just needs to reach those arms to the sky. It can grow, it can be green, it can be large, but it needs to climb. It needs to reach its arms to the sky. And so I did have that checkered past. Something that I thought was extremely out of my control also happened. Some of my plants required pollination, but they didn't. They weren't pollinated because I didn't really pay any attention to the setting. I didn't invite those pollinators. Or I can remember, I don't know if anybody's ever planted corn. Plant corn, well, I had a single row of corn, plants far apart, and I thought, man, I'm going to go out and harvest 2 or 3 years off of each of those stalks of corn. And the corn grew, and the corn grew high. And the tassels were beautiful golden in the sunlight. No corn. Because there was no pollination. So that's kind of the saga of my checkered past. And I want to talk today about when you're all grown up, when it seems like you should really be producing, but you're not. So let's get into it. I put this into a key spiritual truth. And the key spiritual truth comes from a scripture in the Christian scriptures that talks about growing up into Christ. Now, in unity, we think of the Christ within. We think of Jesus the Christ, who had that Christ within, but we do as well. We are, or have the opportunity to be the Christ. And so I get to my key spiritual truth. We bear fruit as we grow into the Christ within. We bear fruit as we grow into the Christ within. First of all, there are blocks to spiritual fruitfulness. Sometimes, and I grew up in a home like this, how it looked was more important than the substance inside. We had to look good. We had to look good for my father's congregation, for the whole of the community, for anybody who was onlooking. We had to look good. But that's, sorry to say, not always the way it was at home. And it wasn't the pattern that we settled in on to produce real fruit. We'll get to what that real fruit is. First of all, there can be a failure to grow down. Remember we talked about last week when that seed goes in the soil, first it begins to grow down to establish a root system that will allow it to be sturdy and to withstand anything outside, to gather nutrients from the soil. We sometimes forget that growing down is the first goal that we have. Growing into the Christ within, if you will, that's growing in, but we could also think of that growing to a deeper place. We're going to get to how do I do that. Sometimes we don't spiritually pluck out the weeds that grow up and choke our seemingly thriving plant for a period of time. And you know what those weeds are for you? It's things that don't really get you where you want to go, things that don't match up with your heart's desire. They overcome. They never will produce fruit, and they overcome that which would produce fruit because they choke it off. They don't give it room for growth, for blossoming, for fruiting. And sometimes, spiritually, we don't open ourselves up, vulnerable though that may seem to be, reach for the skies and say, here am I. Come on, son. Come on, light. Come on, love. Come, all of these things. I open myself to you. We're so set in our ways that we can't open ourselves to that which is good and that which is possible. Sometimes it's an issue of hydration. There's a phrase that came to me from my youth. It's in a little song. Yeah, I'm going to sing it in a minute. But it's living water. Living water. And that's what feeds us. That's what allows us to get to the place where we blossom and fruit and have an abundant harvest. So hydration, so important. And again, we'll get to what those things are that are going to give us living water. And that song went like that. Drinking at the springs of living water, happy now am I, my soul they satisfy. Drinking at the... Oh, enough of that. You get the idea. Yes, drinking at the springs of living water. You already have some inkling of what that means for you because you've been there and you've tasted and you've sipped. but you haven't come back very often. You haven't really taken a soul thirst. It quenches your thirst. That's what I'm trying to say. You haven't gone deep. Sometimes there's growth that appears and we think, oh man, there's another shoot coming up. But to have real growth for fruit, that may be a sidetrack. That may be something which just distracts you from that heart's desire, from that purpose that you begin to feel from within. It's a distraction. It's a side event. If you're growing tomatoes, you probably know this. As a tomato begins to grow, the main branches of the plant are solid, and then in between comes these little, what do we call them? Suckers that grow up. They're little shoots that take away from the real growth. And so it is with us spiritually. There are little things, well, they may not be bad, they may not look bad, but they take us away from the real growth that we desire. And then sometimes we don't protect that growth. Now, I'm relatively new to Arizona. And I'm learning that more than sun is sometimes needed. And it's sometimes relief from the sun. So we don't protect the plant, and the sun comes up and the plant fails to reach maturity, fails to fruit, because it's just too hot. Same is true on the other side of it. Sometimes the weather just goes deep south, below freezing. And the plant can't grow in that context. It freezes, withers, and dies. We could protect that plant in some situations. We could time a planting of the seeds a little differently. But if we don't protect that plant that really wants to grow up, wants to produce fruit, we won't have it. All of this is nurture. We're nurturing the plant. I like a quote from Rumi. And I'm going to say the quote, and then I'm going to come back and revise it. Hope Rumi doesn't mind, but I'm going to do it anyway. Every leaf that grows will tell you. What you sow will bear fruit. So if you have any sense, my friend, don't plant anything but love. So I'm going to say, don't nurture anything but love. Don't nurture anything but those things that lift you up, those that satisfy your soul. Nurture only love. Again, we bear fruit as we grow into the Christ within. Our very nature, our very Christ nature, that's what we are. More than the physical appearances that are true of us. So, we want to grow into what we truly are, the Christ within. Those are all the things that keep us from getting where we want to go. And here's the other one that doesn't seem to be in our control so much, but maybe not. And that's pollination. Okay, here's a quiz. What color is pollen? Yellow. Oh, not all pollen, but most of all pollen is yellow. And you can just see those. Ever seen a blown up picture of a bee with pollen stuck to its legs and its body? Well, the pollen is there, yes, to go back to the hive, but the byproduct is that bee goes from one flower to another and pollinates that second flower, which allows that to be fertilized and for that fruit eventually to come. So in pollination, the plant has grown up. Maybe it looks really great. The blossoms have come, and it's time for pollen to be transferred, because what's true of this pollination process is that one plant has a male component, a male aspect. Well, they may have a female aspect too, but another plant needs that male aspect, needs to be able to receive that in order for fruit to come. So we see our little bees, or it could be butterflies, could be beetles, could be the wind. We see these pollinators taking that male, that very active part of the fertilization process, and taking it to another flower before it goes to the hive. And that other flower has a female aspect that's receptive, that takes that in. Pollen is transferred, and only in pollinating plants, and there are some self-pollinating plants, only in those plants that must be pollinated, only then can they produce when the pollen is there. Let's talk about the bee a little bit. Yesterday at Saturday Soul Boost, now I'm warning you, I'm not trying to tell you this because of a salacious nature. I want to look at the truth of it. We had a little cartoon, and Tulip and Daisy and Rose were sitting in a classroom. You saw them sitting as though they were sitting in chairs. And Mr. or Ms., I don't know which, B was standing leaning against the desk at the front of the room. And the title was that this is the first meeting for these flowers at the Plant Parenthood Association. And the bee at the front, the teacher or the convener, says, if you don't want to be pollinated, keep your petals closed. The truth, let's get to the truth of it. When we're not open and receptive, we're never going to grow. We're never going to be able to produce fruit. And the degree of our openness and receptiveness determines the harvest that we will reap. One more thing about bees. If you observe bees closely when they're about this work of pollinating, they may go to the flower or the bed of flowers, and they buzz above one and another, and finally they light on one. Spiritually, I think that's like looking for where our deepest desires are. Because guess what? Those deepest desires not only pollinate the other plant, they turn into honey. That honey is good for sweetening, good for energy, good for healing. It's golden, it's miraculous. Back to the plant. We have, similar to the plant, a certain energy, and we have both divine feminine energy and divine masculine energy. Oh yes, every one of us. So if you're a man, you've got divine feminine energy in addition to your divine masculine energy. And if you're a woman, you have that divine masculine energy too. We've already hinted, but the divine feminine energy is receptive. Receptive. The divine masculine energy is active. The divine feminine is like the yin to the yang of the yin yang. The divine feminine focuses on being, the divine masculine on doing. The feminine is intuitive. Remember, man or woman, you have all of these within you. They may not be very well developed, some of them. The divine feminine, intuitive. The divine masculine sets and directs the action. I really like, Donna shared a book with me that's on her bookshelf. I'm always reading her bookshelf for something. Many of you may know the author, Shakti Gawain. Creative Visualization is probably what you know, but this book is Living in the Light. And she says so simply what this masculine and feminine energy that's within us, that's in our very nature, is all about. I want to just share a little bit of that. She says, I think of our female aspect as being intuitive. This is the deepest and wisest part of ourselves. The male aspect is action, our ability to do things in the physical world. Both parts, both aspects of the energy that is us are necessary to bear fruit. The merging of divine feminine and divine masculine energy produces fruit. And you probably have an idea about what some of those fruits are like, but sometimes you forget. Again, the Christian scriptures in Galatians say the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If you want to know if you're really on the road to producing fruit, take a look at your life and saying, in what measure are these being produced? Are these being nurtured? In Key Spiritual Truth, we bear fruit as we grow into the Christ within our very nature. And now we get down to the part that I like, but I'm always challenged when I get to this because it's a personal challenge for me as well as I consider this. First thing that I think of when I think of how do I do this is a phrase that one of my teachers said that I just can't forget. And that's Reverend Dr. Paul Hasselbeck, a Unity teacher of metaphysics. And he says, I will be the best Christ I can be today. I will be the best Christ I can be today. If we keep that in our awareness, we're going to change things a little bit. We're further on our way to producing fruit. Remember that Christ is within us. The Christ is within. So just as we would say that Jesus is the Christ, this may sound like a little way out there, but you as well are the Christ. You have within you that Christ consciousness ready to be awakened, ready to be put to use. So go home and find a sticky note. I should have brought sticky notes for you so you can do it. To say, today I determine to be the best Christ I can be. It's there within you. As we grow into it, it's going to produce the fruit that we want to see. That's number one. Number two, don't forget that one. Go home, write something out. Donna, will you remind me, please?
To do what?
to write something out.
Oh.
Donna is probably about 60% of my memory. No, but she's very helpful at reminding me of things. And I say, oh, Donna, just write it down. And she does sometimes, but she's a great reminder. But remember this. Take it to heart. Use it. Try it out. See how it works for you. Secondly, pluck out the weeds and hydrate. What are the weeds? What are the things that are just totally outside of where you want to go? As best you know the deep desires of your heart, as best you know the purpose that you have, there's a lot of stuff that's growing in your life that's going to kind of choke that out. Identify the weeds. They're different for each one of you. I'm not going to suggest what they are, but take a moment to see what are those weeds. And then the next step would be to make sure that plant is hydrated. Make sure there's plenty of moisture. Make sure that living water is there. And you too know what works for you in terms of living water. Is it the time we spend together in community, either here on Sunday morning or in smaller groups? Is that the living water? Is the things that you read or you listen to or the music that you play, is that the living water for you? What is it? What is that living water? Drink there. Quench your thirst on that. So you got the two things. Let go of the weeds. Pluck them out. Bring into yourself that living water. And then going back to our idea of the aspects of the divine feminine and the divine masculine. Find balance for those. If you're like me, a guy, well, you could be a woman and also have the same kind of experience that I have. I lived much of our life not even having a clue that I had intuition. Chuck D. Gowan went on to say in that chapter on the masculine and feminine within that the divine feminine, hold on guys, hold on to your seats, sets the agenda and tells the divine masculine, here's what we want. And the divine masculine says, yes, it is. Now here's how we're going to do it. Bring that into balance in your life. If you're all out there doing, very little being, bring it into your life. Bring that balance into your life. And if the reverse is true, if you're stuck looking at your navel, you may need some balance on the side of action. Taking direction from that divine masculine within you, balancing it, and guess what happens? We produce fruit when that happens. So were I to live my life again, my gardening life, I would avoid many of the things that have kind of smudged my checkered past. And we've enumerated them here. Because I'm learning on a spiritual level that the Christ within me, the divine that I am, when awakened, when grown into, that produces fruit. And so it is.